student of Knowledge TV.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
من سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Inshallah, we will begin this week's lesson number 8, by looking at the tayammum section. Now, there is an incident which led to the prescription of tayammum, which led to tayammum being considered as an adequate substitute to attain purity and taharat and purification in the absence of water. And there is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, that she says that once we, and we here means the Azwaj Mutahharat, the blessed wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we undertook a journey with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we stopped over at a place called Bayda or Zatul Jaysh. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the blessed wives and also the companions as well, they were traveling and they stopped over at a place called Bayda or Zatul Jaysh. And it was at that place where, according to one narration, Hazrat Aisha anha lost a necklace. In another narration, it says that Hazrat Aisha anha's necklace broke, which caused the beads of the necklace to scatter, and that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions, they remained back in Bayda and Zatul Jaysh, looking for the necklace of Hazrat Aisha anha, or looking for the beads of the necklace of Hazrat Aisha anha. Now, Bayda or Zatul Jaysh was a place where there was no water. It was like a derelict land. It was like middle of nowhere. There was hardly any water there. So some of the companions, they went to Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, the father of Hazrat Aisha anha, and they said to him that, look at your daughter. She lost a necklace at such a place. She stopped Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and companions from proceeding and continuing with the journey. How are we going to do wuzu? How are we going to read namaz? And Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, listening to what these companions were saying, then went to Hazrat Aisha anha and then started scolding her, started telling her that, look what you've done. You've lost your necklace. You stopped Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions from proceeding on the journey. You stopped them at a place where it's all derelict, there's no water. How are we going to do wuzu? And at Fajr time, because at that time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sleeping, and then at Fajr time when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam woke up, and the companions, they could not find the necklace of Hazrat Aisha anha, the verse of tayammum was revealed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً, that if you cannot find water, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ مِنْ, which means that if you cannot find water, then do tayammum on the sa'idan tayyiba, on the pure park earth, on the pure park substance of the earth. فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ مِنْ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains how to do the tayammum, what is considered farz and obligatory in the tayammum, and that is that you wipe your face, you wipe your arms with the dust and the soil and the mud of the earth, and through that way you can achieve taharat and purification. So that is the incident which is found in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, which led to the revelation of tayammum, and which led to tayammum being considered as an adequate substitute in the absence of water. And from this particular incident, two things can further be derived from this incident. The first thing, or the first point, is that this story tells us the flexible nature of the Sharia law, tells us the flexible nature of Islamic Sharia law. Other kind of law systems in the world, what would they have done is that either you do this, or if not, face the consequences. But in Islam, it's different. Islam says that if you cannot find water, then there is a substitute, and do tayammum. And there are many examples which inshallah we're going to read in this particular book, and in particular in the jurisprudence and the fiqh side, where Islam says that, okay, if you cannot read namaz standing up, then sit down and read namaz. If you cannot even sit down and read namaz, then even lie down and read namaz. Even if you are in a hospital bed and you can move your head around, you are still required and you are still compelled to read namaz, because there's always a solution there. Okay, even to the extent that if there's like a bandage over your arm and you can't wash that particular area, then there's a solution. And Islam says that, okay, in that situation, pass wet hands over that particular bandage. Obviously, these masails we're going to look at later in a bit more detail. So exactly same with tayammum as well, that Islam does recognize, and the Sharia law does recognize, that there may be occasions where a person, he cannot find water. Or as we're going to look at later, there may be some occasions where a person, he cannot use water. Islam doesn't say that, no, you have to use water, and then if not, then that's it, you're going to be in trouble and there's going to be guna. Nothing like that. Islam then gives the solution to the problem, gives the answer to the problem, and he says, okay, if you cannot use water, then you can do tayammum. So that's one subtle point which we can understand. And the second subtle point which we can derive from this incident talks about the importance and the significance of namaz and salah. The namaz and salah is something where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not just forgiven it just like that. Just because you cannot find water, it doesn't mean that that's it. I don't have to read namaz. But instead Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, okay, if you cannot find water, then there's a substitute, that do tayammum, pass mud or soil or dust over your face and your arms, and then you can achieve taharat and purification in that way. So at the same time, we can also derive the importance of salah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that even if you are ill, you are still required and compelled to read namaz. Nowadays, these kind of little things that whenever we are ill, we don't read namaz, we think, oh, I'm ill, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to forgive me because namaz isn't compulsory. That is not entirely true. Okay, namaz is a very important pillar of Islam, very important rukn of Islam, to the extent that even if you cannot find water to achieve taharat and purification and read namaz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sharia says that, okay, there is a substitute here, and that is that do tayammum instead, and you can achieve taharat and purification in that particular way. Now, before we look at this particular section in a bit more detail, a couple of things which I'm going to mention. The first thing which I'm going to mention here is with regards to the conditions which needs to be found for tayammum to be wajib and obligatory. So the conditions which needs to be found for tayammum to be obligatory and wajib on that individual. Now, the first condition is that the person has to be a Muslim. If a person who's not a Muslim, who's a disbeliever, and if he wants to do tayammum, then that tayammum is not going to be considered as cleaning or purifying that particular individual. So the first condition is that you have to be a Muslim. The second condition is for tayammum to be correct and valid or obligatory is that the person has to be mature. He has to be baligh. He has to have reached the age of puberty. So again, if a person who, for example, is a child and he wants to do tayammum, then tayammum is not compulsory or obligatory upon him. The third condition is that the individual has to be sane. he has to be aqil. If that individual is insane or there's something wrong in him mentally, then it is not obligatory and compulsory for him to do tayammum. Because tayammum is one of those things that you have to know how to perform the tayammum. So if someone is not aware of how to do the tayammum, is not aware of the obligation of tayammum, then tayammum does not become compulsory and farz upon him. And the fourth condition which is necessary for tayammum to be obligatory is that a person has to be either number one in the state of hadath asghar or number two in the state of hadath akbar. And these two terms which we've already looked at before, hadath asghar basically means someone who's in need of wuzu, and hadath akbar means someone who's in need of a bath. So someone who's had a wet dream, say for example, then he can also perform tayammum as well, as we're going to look at later. Or a person who's in need of wuzu, so he's broken his wuzu and namaz time is approaching, there's no water around, then that person can do tayammum. If a person is already in the state of wuzu, and we've looked at this masla before, that obviously out of reward and out of thawab, if you're already in the state of wuzu, you can do a fresh wuzu to read the next namaz. However, if you are already in the state of wuzu and you've gone somewhere on a journey and there's no water around, and you think to yourself that, look, I'm already in the state of wuzu and I want to redo my taharat and purification, what I will do is that I will just do tayammum and then read namaz. So that would not be considered valid. Okay, remember, you have to either number one in the state of hadath asghar or hadath akbar for your tayammum to be correct. If you are already clean and park from before, then there's no need for you to do tayammum. And even if you did tayammum, then that tayammum would not be considered valid or acceptable. Another important point regarding the tayammum is that in tayammum it is a condition and it is imperative that you make an intention. That's where tayammum differs from wudu. As I mentioned before in the wuzu section, that to perform wuzu, and when you are performing wuzu and to make intention, is something which is a sunnah or something which is mustahab and desirable. So if you did not make the intention of cleanliness or taharat and purification and you perform the wuzu, your wuzu would be done. However, when it comes to tayammum, it is a condition that you make an intention. So before you start the tayammum, and we're going to look at the process and the method of performing a tayammum in a second or so, you have to make an intention. You have to say that I am doing tayammum to achieve purification, to achieve taharat. And if you do not make that particular condition or niyat or intention, then your tayammum will not be done. And the reason why it's important to make an intention is that the word tayammum, the Arabic word tayammum, literally means to intend. Tayammama yatayammamu means to intend. So because the actual word itself, tayammum, means intention, and because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran has said fatayammamu, so therefore the jurists have said that it is a must and it is imperative that you make an intention for tayammum before you start the tayammum. So that's one main condition. And another condition we need to be found for tayammum to be correct is that there has to be a udhr. There has to be an excuse which is making it lawful or valid for you to do tayammum. I.e., there is no water around. Or, for example, there is water, but for some reason you can't use it. If there's plenty of water around and you've got no problem, then in that situation, you're not allowed to do tayammum at all. That tayammum which you do will not be considered like valid, but instead just be considered that you've just put some soil or mud over your face. That's what it is. So if there's water around, you have to use the water. Okay? Or, for example, if there's anything else around, which has got like a liquid and so on, then you will have to use that. However, if there's no water around, or like for example there is water but for some reason you can't use it, then only in those situations, only in those excuses, you will be allowed to do tayammum. So these are two main things to remember from one, when performing tayammum, or for the tayammum to be considered valid and accepted. And that is number one, that you make an intention beforehand. And number two is that there has to be a udhr, there has to be an excuse for tayammum to be applicable, such as you cannot use water or there is no water around. Now, the next section which I'm going to explain is with regards to the method of tayammum, how to perform the tayammum. And some may think that, well, it's not something important to learn or know because in England there's no actually, there's always water around. If you go to a masjid, there's always going to be a water. At home, there's always going to be water. There's always going to be scenarios or situations where there's going to be water. Even when you are traveling and you stop over at a service station, even in the toilets, they have water there as well. So some of you may be thinking that, it's not that really important to learn about the tayammum section. But as we're going to look at later, there are some situations where even though there may be water around, but the Sharia has allowed you to do tayammum. And I'll just give you an example, such as what may happen is that you may be ill or sick, really ill. Okay, sometimes like when you have a cold and so on. So when you are really ill, even like a bit of cold water, if that was to touch your body, you get this kind of shiver down your spine, shiver all over your body. Now what may happen is that when you fall ill, you then have a wet dream. You have a wet dream. So obviously, you have to have a bath. But the water is really cold. And if you're going to use the water, then there's a grave danger that your illness may increase. Or there's a very grave danger that something may happen to you. So in that situation, the Sharia says that actually actually do tayammum. So there may be some occasion like this at home where something may have gone wrong with your boiler and only there's cold water coming out and you're really ill and then you have a wet dream. So the Sharia doesn't say that basically kill yourself and just like have a cold shower. But as I explained before, there's always alternatives there. And the alternative which the Sharia says is that, okay, there's no need for you to have a shower, but instead you can achieve purification and taharat, and that is by doing tayammum instead. So even though you may be thinking that tayammum is never ever going to happen, but there may be some occasions in the future or some situations where you may have gone somewhere like camping and there's no water around. So how are you going to read your namaz? So you read your namaz by doing tayammum. So there may be some situations in the future where you may fall in such a predicament or such a situation where you have to do tayammum. And that's when obviously these masail which we're going to read today and learn about today and in probably the next lesson as well will come into use. Now the method of performing tayammum is, number one, as I just explained, you make an intention. So first of all, you make an intention that you want to get clean, you want to purify yourself. The second thing which you will do is that you will strike both hands on some earth. Now the earth, what I mean by earth here, it's going to come up later. Earth can mean something like mud, soil, or it can also mean dust as well. So even dust, that is considered as earth. So it could be like, for example, there's a carpet and there's dust on the carpet, so you can do tayammum on that. Okay, even though the actual carpet itself you can't do tayammum from, but if there is dust on the carpet, you can do tayammum from that. Something like a book, so obviously you can't do tayammum from a book, but if there is dust on the book, then you can do tayammum from that. Similarly, stones, bricks, unbaked bricks, even like the unbaked bricks, not the other one, the new ones, the orangish one, the baked ones. So you can't do tayammum from that, but in particular the unbaked bricks you can do tayammum from. And another point to remember with regards to where you're doing tayammum from, it's not necessary that that thing which you are doing tayammum from has to have some kind of imprint. Meaning that there doesn't have to be anything there. So just say, for example, you've got a stone and you washed a stone. Even then, you could actually do tayammum from that. Because obviously when you wash a stone, it's going to be clean. There's going to be no dust, nothing on that. So it doesn't matter. You could actually do tayammum from that. So even though there's no kind of dust on the actual stone itself, or there's no dust on the actual brick, or there's no kind of imprints or no kind of traces of any dirt, even then you can actually do tayammum from that, because it's not conditioned that there has to be some kind of dust on the stones or on the bricks which you are doing tayammum from. Even on the face of the stone, even though there's no imprints there, even though there are no dust or dirt there, you can actually do tayammum from that as well. So the second thing, as I was going to explain, the method of performing tayammum is that you strike both hands on the earth. So it could be something like mud, soil, sand, any of these things. So you strike your hands on them. Now, after you strike your hands, then what you do is that you will dust the hands and you blow off any kind of excess soil or mud which may have got on your hands. So if it's like, say, for example, mud or soil, so if you were to tap it or strike it onto the ground, so what may happen is that there may be too much soil or mud on your hands. So if you're then going to put it over your face, then it's going to like make you look a bit dirty, it's going to disfigure you. So therefore what you should do is that after you strike your hands on the dust or on the ground, what you should do is that you should pat both hands together so that you get rid of any excess dust, any excess mud or any excess soil. Then afterwards what you do, the first thing is that you then do masa of your face. As Allah mentions, famsahu wujuhikum. So you do masa of your face. Now, like I mentioned in the wuzu section, that when you are doing wuzu, you have to make sure that every single part of your face is washed, otherwise your wuzu will not be done. The same also applies for tayammum as well. That when you are doing tayammum of your face, so you have to make sure that every single part of your face is covered with either the soil or whatever, the imprint, whatever. You have to make sure that it covers all of your face. Okay, it's not. You don't have to, like the ruling with regards to the beard, washing the beard and so on. So it's not necessarily that you have to make sure that the dust or the soil or the sand reaches the inner part of your beard. As long as you do it on top of it, then that will be considered sufficient. Okay, so you don't have to make sure that the soil or the dust reaches the inner part of your beard. As long as you do it on top, then that will be considered sufficient. So that's what you do first. And then afterwards, what will you do is that you will then strike both hands, so that will complete the masa of your face. The next thing you will do is that you will then strike both hands on the earth again, or on the soil or mud. You will then tap both hands together so that you get rid of any excess soil or mud. And then afterwards, you will do masa of over your right arm. So you use your left hand this time. So you will start by doing masa of your right arm. Obviously, like you do in wuzu, making sure that the elbow is also covered in dust and soil. And then you will do the bottom part of your right arm. And then with your right hand, you will then do masa of your left arm, obviously starting from the fingers all the way up to your elbows, and then doing the bottom part of your left arm as well. So these are the two things which you have to do for your tayammum to be considered valid. So remember, unlike in wuzu where 4 things are first, that is your face, washing the face, washing your arms, doing masa of your head and washing your feet. When it comes for tayammum, only 2 things are first. That is doing masa of your face and doing masa of your arms, right arm and your left arm. There's no masa of your head when you're doing tayammum, and also there's no masa of your feet. And this thing which I mentioned is also applicable if you are doing tayammum after having a wet dream. So after you have a wet dream, so obviously some may argue and say, or some may say, okay, well, I've got like semen and everything over my pants. So obviously what you have to do, you have to get rid of your pants and everything, and if there is any kind of sticky bits over your private parts or over your thighs, because there's no water, then you'll have to use something else like a towel or leaves or something to get rid of that. But when you are cleaning yourself, or when you are achieving taharat and purity through tayammum, what you will do is that you will firstly just do masa of your face, and then afterwards just do masa of your right arm and your left arm, and that's it. You will be considered clean and pure, and it will be now permissible for you to read namaz. So the same procedure for doing tayammum if you are in hadath asghar also applies for achieving purity and taharat if you are in the state of hadath akbar. What I'll do now, I'll just go over the text and there's some relevant ruling, inshallah, we'll try to discuss. Now, the first part of the text, Imam Quduri rahmatullah alayhi says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدِ الْمَاءِ وَهُوَ مُسَافِرٌ أَوْ خَارِجَ الْمِصْرِ. So a person who cannot find water, وَهُوَ مُسَافِرٌ whilst traveling, أَوْ خَارِجَ الْمِصْرِ, or he is outside the city, بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ الْمِصْرِ نَحْوَ الْمِيلِ, and between himself and the city there is a distance of 1 mile or akthar, or more than that. Okay, so they're just mentioning the scenario that a person, he is traveling and he can't find water. And the reason why the author has said that is most of the time when you are traveling, that is a situation where you will find, or there is a more likelihood of not finding water. And you need to realize that this particular book which we are reading was set like hundreds of years ago when many Arabs would travel through the deserts. There weren't any like service stations in those days. So obviously they would be traveling and more likelihood that there would be no water. So a person, he's traveling and he cannot find water, or a person is outside the city. Okay, so he's not in the city, but he's outside the city or the town, and between him and the city there is a distance of 1 mile or more. Okay, so generally speaking, in the city you will find water. But this person, he's outside the boundaries of the city, and the distance between him and the city is 1 mile or more. Or, the next scenario the author mentions, وَكَانَ يَجِدُ الْمَاءِ, that a person or an individual, he can find water, إِلَّا أَنَّهُ مَرِيض, but he is sick, فَخَافَ إِنِ اسْتَعْمَلَ الْمَاءِ اشْتَدَّ مَرَضُهُ, and he fears that if he was to use the water, his illness will increase. So it's a very good scenario. Like what may happen is that person, he's got water, he's at home, there's plenty of water, but he is ill or he is sick, and he fears that if he was to use water, ishtadda maraduhu, his illness or his sickness may increase. Now this particular text which I mentioned, obviously latter-day scholars or contemporary scholars have commentated on this particular text, and they've said, or they kind of highlighted that some people may take the wrong meaning, or some people may take advantage of this particular flexible ruling. Because what may happen is that someone may be ill, and he just thinks to himself that, yeah, if I was to use water, I'm going to get ill. So what does he do? He just uses tayammum. So therefore, the scholars have said that this particular situation here is applicable for that individual who's had past experiences where when he falls ill, if he was to use water, his illness or his sickness increases. So it's not for everyone, because obviously there are some people that when they fall ill, they can still use water, and they can still use cold water, and the illness does not increase. So this ruling here of doing tayammum for a person who's ill and he fears that if he was to use water, his illness may increase, doesn't apply or is not applicable for that kind of individual. But for those people who's ill and he's got some past experiences where when he falls ill, if he was to use water, whether it's warm or cold, his illness increases, then for that individual, this particular ruling applies. And that is that if a person, he has water, but he is ill, and he fears that if he was to use water, his illness will increase, then that person can do tayammum. Or another scenario which the author mentions here is أَوْ خَافَ الْجُنُوبِ إِنِ اغْتَسَلَ بِالْمَاءِ يَقْتُلُهُ الْبَرْضُ أَوْ يُمَرِّدَهُ, that a person who's in the state of janabat, meaning that who's had a wet dream, who's in need of a bath, and he fears that if he was to have a ghusl, with water, then the cold يقتله البرد, the cold will kill him, أو يمرضه, or will make him ill. So a person who's not ill, but he's had a wet dream, and there's cold water. Now he now fears that if he was to use cold water, he will now fall ill. Or for example, like he may be ill from before, and he's had a wet dream, and if he was to use cold water or any sort of water to get himself clean, then he fears that there is a danger that the cold, i.e. the coldness of the water, will kill him, will make him really ill, will kind of like, paralyze him and so on, like frostbite, whatever. Then in that situation, he will be allowed to do tayammum. As the author then goes on to say, فَإِنَّهُ يَتَيَمَّمُ بِالسَّعِيدِ, that such a person will be allowed to do tayammum with bark or pure soil or mud of the earth. So these are the situations, or known as the excuses, where a person can do tayammum. Okay, so it applies when a person cannot find water, or for example, he's outside the city and between himself and the water there is a distance of 1 mile away. Or it could be like you being in the city somewhere, but the nearest place where you can find water is 1 mile or so away. Or like for example, a person, he is ill and he fears that if he was to use water, his illness will increase. Or a person has had a wet dream and he now fears that if he was to have a cold shower, either the coldness will kill him, or his illness may increase, or he may fall ill. And in all those situations, the Sharia has given flexibility and leeway, and has said that such a person will be allowed to do tayammum with the soil and with the dust of the earth, with the mitti and with the substance of the earth. The next part of the section talks about how to perform the tayammum, and the author mentions what tayammumu darbatan, that there are 2 strikes in tayammum. As I mentioned before, that when you do tayammum, there are 2 strikes which will be made onto the earth. And with the first strike, yamsahu bi ihdahuma wajhahu, that you will do masa of your face, wa bil ukhra yadayhi ila al mirfaqain. And with the second strike, you will do masa of your arms all the way up to your elbows. Your right arm up to your right elbow, and your left arm up to your left elbow. The author then goes on to mention, وَالتَّيَمُّمُ فِي الْجَنَابَةِ وَالْحَدَثِ سَوَاءٌ. Again, this ruling was already looked at the beginning, that tayammum can be done whether an individual or person is in the state of janabat, or whether he's in hadath asghar. So whether he's had a wet dream, and as I just been explaining, that he fears that if he was to use water, then the water will make him ill or it may kill him, then in that situation he will be allowed to do tayammum. To achieve taharat and purification, he will be allowed to do tayammum. Wal hadath, or a person is in the state of hadath asghar, like he's broken his wuzu, or he doesn't have wuzu, and he's gone somewhere where there's no water around and namaz is about to start, then in that situation, that person will be allowed to do tayammum. The next particular section talks about with what things you're allowed to do tayammum with. Now there are 2 things. One is the permitted items which you can do tayammum from, and the second section is the impermitted items where you cannot do tayammum from. Now, if you just, those who are writing, the things which you can do tayammum from is number 1, the earth. So earth here means like just the ground, the land which is outside, you can do tayammum from that. Number 2, from the sand. So you can do tayammum from sand. Number 3, from stones. So as I mentioned, even though there may be no imprints on that, just you could do tayammum from that. Number 4, from limestones. Number 5, walls of mud. So like mud houses. So like in Bangladesh, Pakistan, many of our relatives, families, they live in mud houses and so on. So you can actually do tayammum from mud houses, from the walls of the mud. Number 6, from clay. So again, you can do tayammum from clay. And also number 7, all items which have dust. So anything which has dust, you can do tayammum from. And as I mentioned, that it could be something like a book. So obviously you can't do tayammum from a book. But if there is dust over the book, then you can do tayammum from that. Something like, for example, like laptops or anything, carpets. Obviously you can't do tayammum from a laptop or from a carpet. But if there's dust over those items, then you can do tayammum from that. Even to the extent, scholars have written, that just imagine there was some feces, like cow dung. And on top of the cow dung, there's a massive pile of dust. So do you know the top part of the dust, you can actually do tayammum from that as well. Obviously that dust which is touching the dung part, obviously you can't use that. But if there's like a big massive pile of dust over the dung or over the feces, so the actual top part you can do tayammum from that. So any dust, whether it's on chairs or on buildings, you can do tayammum from that. Okay? But obviously just like normal walls and these kind of things, obviously you can't do tayammum. This is the next section, the items where you cannot do tayammum from. So you can't do tayammum from wood. So woods, you can't do tayammum from that. Metal, you can't do tayammum from metal. Glass, so glass, windows, these kind of things you can't do tayammum from. Number 4, food items. Okay, so food items like apples, pears, these kind of things, cherries, bread, you can't do tayammum from that. However, as I explained before, if these items like wood, metal, glass, or food items, if they have dust over it, so then you can do tayammum from. And similarly, all items which burn to ash, rot, or melt, you can't do tayammum from. So any items which burn to ash, or which rot, or which melt, then you can't do tayammum from those kind of items, because items which burn to ash or rot or melt, it's a sign that it's not from min jinsil ard, it's not from the earth, it's not from the plants, it's not from the soil and the sand. It's something which is artificial, something which is man-made, something like plastic, which obviously melts when you burn. So that is a sign that it's man-made, so therefore you won't be able to do tayammum from those kind of items. So the next section, just very quickly, the author says, وَيَجُوزُ التَّيَمُّمْ إِنْ ذَا بِحَنِيفَ رَحِمُ اللَّهِ وَمُحَمَّدْ رَحِمُ اللَّهِ بِكُلِّ مَا كَانَ مِنْ جِنْسِ الْأَرْضِ. So according to Imam Abu Hanifa and one of his students, Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayh, they say that it is permissible to do tayammum ma kana min jinsil ard, which is of the category of the earth. So you can do tayammum from anything which is from the jins of the earth, which is from the category of the earth, meaning that anything which grows from the earth, such as sand, soil, mud, sand, these kind of things, dust, then you can do tayammum from them. Such as, and some examples which are given, such as katturab, such as mud or soil. Wal ramal, i.e. sand. Wal hajar, which means stones. Wal jas wa nawra, these are like types of limestones. Wal kuhl, which is a type of coal, so you can do tayammum from that. Was zirnigh, and zirnigh means arsenic, so these kind of things you can do tayammum from. Whereas according to Imam Yusuf rahmatullah alayh, he says la yajuzu illa bit-turab wal-ramali khasatan, that you can only do tayammum from at-turab, which means mud or soil, wal-ramal, and from sand. So these are the only two things which Imam Yusuf rahmatullah alayh, who is a student of Imam Abu Hanifa, he says that you can only do tayammum from two things, which is either number 1 at-turab, which means soil or mud, or number 2 ar-ramal, which means sand. So you can only do tayammum from these two things. Whereas according to Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad, they are more flexible with this particular ruling, and they say that anything which is from the substance of the earth, anything which grows from the earth, such as mud, soil, sand, stones, anything which is from the earth, then you can do tayammum from those items. So we'll just leave it there for this week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act upon what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillah.
Be a student of knowledge.